So I started off choosing between three different artists. These artists were The Weeknd, Drake, and Kanye. Just because these are my three favorite artists. I also thought it would be quite fun to make an album cover for these three artists. So I first started off with looking at different types of album covers that these artists have already made. So Drake. A lot of Drake's existing albums either have something Toronto based about it, or it also features his face, which I believe would be way too hard to capture something without going far away from his existing theme of existing album covers. So, Kanye is next. I thought Kanye would be very fun to make an album cover for, as his work is very unpredictable and it seems to be always changing. As it started through the whole college phase and then into the Heartless and Pablo phases, through now creating music about Jesus within Jesus is King. So I thought his album covers and vinyl covers that are already existing are very creative, and I don't think I'd be able to create something as creative as these existing album covers. So that leaves me with The Weeknd. The Weeknd is actually my favorite artist out of these three, which I thought would make it a lot easier in creating this album cover, as I am more familiar with his music compared to the other two. So first I went through The Weeknd's different themes within his albums. First, The Weeknd has a very gritty theme with his Trilogy and Kissland albums. This also is in his newer My Dear Melancholy album. He also features some more upbeat albums such as Beauty Behind the Madness, After Hours, and Starboy. So after exploring these different albums, I narrowed it down to Kissland and My Dear Melancholy. These two albums have very similar themes to them, although Kissland is about his experiences in Japan and My Dear Melancholy is about his recent breakups with his girlfriend. So, I started with Kissland. I did some sketches of some ideas that I had. Most of these ideas were a person walking down a dark street with different sources of artificial light, such as advertising and street lights. I decided to go with My Dear Melancholy as I feel like I'm more familiar with this album as it is newer compared to Kissland, which was brought out in 2013. As this album is about heartbreak, I had different ideas about mostly how The Weeknd was feeling at the time, some of his thoughts, what was making him feel the way he did, and what made him feel just mentally unwell. I also had an idea that a rose would also be a good use as it usually symbolizes love. So my first idea for an album cover was a person falling. This was to symbolize them falling in free thought, as somebody with mental health problems could usually feel like they're just falling into a never-ending hole. For my second idea, I went and purchased a rose and took photos of it. I went into Photoshop and added an effect which made the rose look dark, which would only highlight the bright red areas. For further exploration into this idea, I then added some texture to give the cover a more gritty feeling. My third idea is just a very simple image of The Weeknd from a side view that I created in Illustrator. This image features two versions, one which can be seen as normal and the other can be seen as glitchy or even confusing to the human eye. For this design, I then added a texture to give it a more gritty feeling, and for an ideation I also added a rip texture which can be seen to have the normal head underneath. I then used the same idea for the larger head rather than two smaller ones. I really like this design, but I didn't go for it as my final design as I don't feel like it gives the feeling of heartbreak or love. Well, and that's why I went with The Dark Rose with the gritty background, as I feel like this better fits the overall theme of the album.